Hello, welcome to the Mindfulness Medicine Podcast. My name is Nikhil Desai. I'm a rising M3 in medical school. And today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. Some of you guys may know me from social media. I've been posting videos for the last 4 years. But I recently, over the last 6 months, took a big break. I haven't been posting. And the reason why is I didn't feel like what I was putting out really aligned with my new perspectives, new morals, new identity. But I feel like this new project really falls with what I want to start creating and what I want to start putting out. Essentially, what this podcast is going to be about is I'm going to be discussing some of the actual experiences I've had in the hospital or during my experience becoming a medical student and beyond, and share what specifically happened and then reflect on sort of some of the insights I've learned from them, discuss the psychological concepts that might relate to the experiences I'm having, and then ultimately even discuss a little bit of the spirituality behind the experiences. And the whole purpose of this is to do active reflection, do mindful reflection on what is happening as a pre-med student, as a med student, and moving forward as a resident and physician. Because I think in medicine, we don't discuss that stuff. I think the idea of going to medicine as a profession is really idealized. And I want to kind of discuss some of the specific things that are happening behind the scenes and break them down. That's the whole concept of the podcast. Some of the episodes that I have planned. Well, today's episode actually is going to be on my experience taking step one, not the study plan or kind of the specific things I did, but my actual experience, how I mentally was feeling a week before, a day before, and the night before the exam, and kind of take you through that side of the test. Because I think it's an underrated, overwhelming aspect of taking step one and taking board exams, or even the MCAT if you're a pre-med in general. But I actually have other episodes planned. For example, my first time experiencing death as a medical student, my first overnight shift as a med student, discussing my experience as a toxic pre-med and kind of how I overcame that mentality. I have a lot of episodes and ideas lined up, but with that being said, let's get into today's episode, which is the day before step one, the night before step one. About a week before my actual test date, I took an MBME exam and I ended up scoring lower than my first pass, which was like 2 or 3 months before. And I think that kind of experience instilled a lot of anxiety. And you might be thinking, you still passed that test. Why were you freaking out? But this was the first time in my life where when I was preparing for a test, it didn't relatively go linear. And I know that's like a privilege and a lot of other people may have not had that experience. But honestly, for me, this was the first time that I've had like a misstep when preparing for a big exam like this. And I didn't really know what to do. And I think as the week before the test went, I continued feeling that anxiety. The other thing about step one that was unique is this was the first time in my life that I felt completely unprepared, even like a week or two before. I firmly believe that unless you are getting 80s or 85s on MBME practice tests, you don't feel like going into the test you're going to crush it. And there's really no way to. I had a friend who was a part of like the running club at my school tell me, dude, you could study for this test for another month and you still won't feel prepared. And I think that really resonated and was true. Like walking into the test, I didn't feel like super prepared for it. But I think that is a part of taking step one in these board exams and something you have to learn to get comfortable with. And in all honesty, I don't think I did. The week before, I was kind of freaking out, trying to figure out like what resources to use, like how to clean up the holes in my content. And I think looking back, I don't know if that was the correct approach. The other thing is I felt this need to like improve that last week. And the fact of the matter was, if you're a week before step one, chances are all the studying you're doing, it may help a little bit, but at that point you kind of know what you got to go in and be confident. And I think that's the most important aspect at that point of studying. There's this like feeling of like, I need to review all these concepts and learn anatomy and do a bunch of Anki cards. But I think what I really need to do is chill out. Part of the reason I may have had this mentality is because the last 3 months I'd ingrained in my head 8-hour studying days. So it's kind of hard to slow down and kind of just realize I was at the end of my preparation. About 3 to 4 days before my actual test, I took my last practice test. And I remember the night before, I had problems falling asleep. I think I was putting a lot of pressure on myself to do well on that test because I knew that depending on how well I did on that, my kind of mental framework going into test day would change. So I was putting a lot of my pressure on myself. It was kind of hard to fall asleep. I kind of couldn't fall asleep even like past midnight into 1 a.m. I decided to take the test a little bit later because, this wasn't the actual test. I could kind of just change when I took it. Eventually ended up falling asleep. But I'll kind of share why later I think that was a mistake, pushing the test back. I actually ended up doing really well on that practice test, which gave me a lot of confidence moving into the last few days before the preparation. The day before the test, I kind of promised myself I wouldn't study and then broke that promise by doing a few hours in the morning. I reviewed this like high yield arrows document. I did like a few practice questions, did some Anki, but then around 10 a.m. I kind of stopped. I was actually really lucky. I had a few friends that were visiting in town that wanted to play basketball. So I ended up going to the gym, playing basketball with them for like 2 to 3 hours, which was awesome. It kind of took my mind off of the test. And then I came home, had some dinner, and then it was kind of time to wind down. As it got closer to the night, though, when I was supposed to sleep, that anxiety that I felt before that last practice test started creeping in, and I started to really worry. You know what? I think this is an important nuance. What was interesting was I wasn't worried about the test. I really feel that. I was worried about the fact that I wouldn't sleep before the test, and that would ultimately then impact my performance. I actually felt pretty confident about the content and stuff. I was just worried that I wouldn't get the correct rest and preparation for it. I remember talking to my family about this, and they kind of just said, put the technology away, wind down, read, try not to think about it, and then go to bed and you'll be fine. That's what I tried to do. As it got closer to bedtime, around 9:30 is when I wanted to go to bed, I felt that anxiety creeping up more and more. I remember when I hit the bed, my heart was racing, and I thought, like, there's no way I'm going to fall asleep. I literally have, like, it felt like palpitations. I was freaking out, to be honest. And essentially what happened over the next few hours is I would hear my mind freaking out about the fact that, dude, if you don't fall asleep, you're not going to be able to take this test tomorrow. You're going to fail the test. You're not going to be rested. You're not going to be able to choose the correct answer. Because a lot of step one is like choosing between two answers at the end, which requires like focus and intuition. My mind was like, you're not going to be able to do that. And then what I would do is I'd like listen to that for 30 minutes. And then something in my mind would pop in and be like, well, maybe if you go to the bathroom and wash your face with some warm water, you'll feel better. Then I'd go do that, try to calm down, and then come back and try to fall asleep. And then maybe 30 minutes after, I would wake up and do some deep breathing and like sit up. Essentially, my mind was like freaking out. It would like come up with solutions. I would listen to those solutions, and then I'd go back to bed. And this repeated over and over and over again. I remember at one point around like 1 a.m. the night of the test, I literally woke up and took a shower because I was like, maybe if you like take a nice warm shower, you'll relax and your sympathetic nervous system will. I was thinking way too much, right? And then around like 3 a.m. I was freaking out. Like I was having a panic attack. I remember I went to like my mom. I was actually staying at my parents' house before the test. I went and like woke up my mom and was like telling her like, dude, I can't fall asleep. And I was like freaking out. And she basically just told me like, hey, Nikhil, this is something that happens to more people than you think. This isn't like unique to you. A lot of people have trouble falling asleep before big exams. You're going to be fine. Even if you don't sleep 1 minute, you're going to be okay. Just go back to bed, close your eyes, don't try to sleep, and just lay there. Try to rest by just laying there. And I think in that moment, I like truly was so helpless that I listened to her. I went back to my bed around 3 a.m. and just laid there. Funny enough, I didn't end up falling asleep. 3 hours later, it was around 6 a.m., which was close enough to my wake up time to where I was like, all right, at this point, you just need to wake up and get ready for the test. I got up, I showered, I went downstairs, I ate some breakfast. And I actually remember feeling like not that tired. I think I wanted to just get the test done so bad. An analogy I'll draw is to when you hear NBA players talk about how they feel before game 7 of a playoff series, they'll say they just want the ball to tip. They don't want to wait the 2 days before the game starts. They want to play the game that next day because of the anxiety of just the uncertainty. And I think I was kind of feeling that same way. I was just so anxious to get the test done that my mind wouldn't rest. I ate breakfast, had some coffee, realized I'd probably need to bring 2 or 3 cups of coffee to the testing center because that fatigue was going to hit at some point, and went on my way. And in a weird way, I had like a very positive outlook leaving my house, going to the testing center, and I attribute a lot of that to my mom. Shout out my mom. When I got to the testing center, I started to get nerves again, just like everybody would. But actually, luckily enough, one of my friends was taking the test at the same time as me, and I kind of like went over to her. We were both quiet at first, and I asked her like, hey, did you sleep last night? Hoping she'd say no. And she's like, not as well as I wished. And kind of like that little bonding moment and sharing a laugh, I think like really relaxed me. She had no idea, but it like really helped me relax going into the test. And I actually felt very confident there's 7 sections of the step 1 exam. Each section is 40 questions. They give you an hour to do it. The first 3 to 4 sections, I felt great. By section 5, 6, and then definitely into 7, the fatigue started to hit. But I think at that point, I had the correct mentality of just trying to do my best, trying to focus. Whatever happens, happens. And I finished the test feeling like that was hard, having no idea if I passed. But overall, being proud of myself for just getting through that whole experience. And ultimately, I ended up passing, which is a huge blessing. But yeah, crazy story. For me, I'd never experienced something like that before. And now let's dig into kind of some of the psychological, spiritual, neuroscientific concepts that relate to this story. So obviously, I was experiencing test anxiety during this experience from a psychological perspective. And with that being said, you might think like you've never had that before. Why did it happen now? And I think test anxiety is something that can kind of just be sparked at a moment. Some people have had it their whole lives. Other people develop it later. Some people only have it for huge exams. And I think I'd fall in that last category. But what's interesting is studies, I looked at some of the papers, show that anywhere from 40 to 60% of medical students suffer with test anxiety. So it's something that's very common, and specifically in the med student population as well. Another psychological concept, something I've struggled with my whole life, is perfectionism. And I have some definitions down here. Perfectionism is defined as the tendency to set excessively high standards for oneself and be overly critical of one's own performance. It's this idea that I shared before of never feeling fully prepared. In the past, I would overstudy to get like the best marks possible. And I thought that was like a healthy thing. But as you move further into your education, and this is kind of a message for pre-med students, as you move further into your educations, you're going to start taking exams that quite literally you cannot perfect. And if you've never gotten used to that fact, you're really, really going to struggle. And step one was that first experience for me where I really felt that to my core. Perfectionism is something that a lot of people in med school have, a lot of high achievers have. Definitely something I struggle with and relevant to this story. Another thing that's personal to me, but I know a lot of people have, is this thing called catastrophizing or catastrophic thinking. I actually went to therapy in college, and one of the things that we identified was I catastrophize a lot, in the sense that I will have a situation or experience happen in my life, and then I'll think of the worst possible outcome that could happen. In this case, not being able to fall asleep will lead me to fail the test. And in my mind, I feel like that's going to happen. It's not a possibility, it's an inevitability. And I think I've worked a lot on that in other aspects of my life, but I never experienced it with school. It was a new experience again for me. This idea of catastrophizing becomes this loop that happens over and over, and one thought leads into another, and then before you know it, you feel like the world is falling. And I think a lot of people in med school that I've talked to have this. Maybe they've never identified it, but it's just something to keep in mind. If you have those thought spirals, it might be something that is kind of a pattern, not only in school, but other aspects of your life. Another interesting thing as I was researching to make this video is the Yerkes-Dodson law. And essentially what that is a law that suggests that performance increases with physiological or mental arousal, but only up to a certain point. At a certain point, feeling anxious or like amped up for a game is helpful. But after a certain point, too much anxiety can impair performance and ultimately lead to bad outcomes. The way this relates to step one is like the anxiety to prepare for the test, being afraid of not doing well, motivated me to prepare. But the night before, that anxiety got so bad that it actually probably impaired my performance. Those are kind of some of the psychological concepts that relate to the story. And the reason I share that is just to provide some framework of how to look at this. I think when we have challenging experiences in our life, it can seem so overwhelming. So having some framework to look at it can kind of give us some insight on sort of what's happening there, to give us an opportunity to take a step back and kind of figure out what's going on. Now, one thing I really wanted to get into for this story was the neuroscience of what's happening, because I personally just think it's interesting. But I think the neuroscience of test anxiety is a topic that once you understand it, really provides some context of what's going on, and if you're a science person, could potentially be helpful. Essentially, when you get stuck in a loop of negative thinking, like worrying about an upcoming exam or replaying past mistakes, your brain is using a system called the default mode network. The default mode network is like your brain's autopilot for self-reflection. It's most active when you're not focused on the outside world, but instead focused on your own thoughts, and especially about your specific experiences, present or past. This idea of catastrophizing or rumination relates to the default mode network, because when the default mode network is overactivated, that's kind of what we feel. There's ruminating on specific thoughts, on certain thoughts, on I'm not going to be able to sleep before this test, and that's going to lead to me not being able to pass. The default mode network activates a bunch of different parts of the brain that's honestly a little bit over my head, and essentially those areas are working overtime, and as a result, it's hard to break free from repetitive negative thoughts. There's the default mode network, but then there's also the frontoparietal network, and these two kind of work in opposites of each other. The FPN helps you focus, control your attention, and switch tasks. When the default mode network, or DMN, is highly active, the FPN is less active. So it's kind of that push-pull kind of thing. This is why it's so hard to sometimes snap out of things. When your default mode network is really high, you're ruminating, you're having those thoughts, and the FPN, which allows you to switch tasks, is suppressed, making it challenging to get out of that loop. As this is happening, one of the things that is triggered is your amygdala and other parts of your brain, and it leads to this state of hyperarousal. This happens when your stress response is on the on button. There's no break. It's just on, 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 on. This keeps you alert and tense, and as you can imagine, that's harder than relax and fall asleep. The sympathetic nervous system is activated, cortisol goes up, heart rate goes up, and your brain stays on high alert. Funny enough, the hyperarousal also increases default mode network activation, which makes this cycle worse and worse and worse. In summary, when you're lying in bed and your head is spinning, the default mode network is overactivated, and your body is in a state of hyperarousal. The parts of your body, like the parasympathetic nervous system and the FPN that can help kind of shift this, are suppressed because in our body, everything is push-pull, which makes it challenging to get out of this spiral. This creates the cycle of the more you ruminate, the more aroused you feel, and the more aroused you feel, the more you ruminate. It just kind of keeps happening over and over again. And if you're like me, understanding this neuroscience, this neurochemistry can really help put some words to what's happening inside of us. Because once again, when you're in that spiral, it's really challenging to recognize what's happening. You're just so caught up in it. And I feel that way, and I think a lot of other people probably do too. Now to move into my personal favorite part of all this, which is the reflection, lessons, and spiritual concepts. And before I get into specifics, I want to share a Tao story. It's called The Farmer and the Horse. And I have it written down here, and I don't want to butcher it, so I'm just going to read. There is a parable that there was once a farmer whose horse ran away. His neighbor said, "Such bad luck." The farmer replied, "Maybe." The next day, the horse returned, bringing with it 3 wild horses. The neighbor said, "How wonderful." The farmer replied, "Maybe." Then the farmer's son tried to ride one of the wild horses, was thrown off, and broke his leg. The neighbor replied, "How terrible." The farmer said, "Maybe." Soon after, soldiers came to the village to recruit young men for the war. They passed over the son because of his injury. What this kind of teaches and what it gets at is we have this thing of reacting to things when they happen. Oh, I got a great score on my practice test for an MBME. I'm going to crush step 1. And then the next day you get a 20% on your UWorld block, and now you feel like trash. And what this story kind of emphasizes is this idea of non-attachment to outcomes, which is a huge concept across all religion and spiritual philosophies. And this relates to me because this thought of not sleeping was like dooming to me. But I ended up passing, right? I got lucky in this sense. But if I was able to look at that this experience of not being able to sleep before the test and be like, it is what it is, which is harder said than done, it would lead to me relaxing, maybe even falling asleep, and I definitely think would have helped me. It wasn't the end of the story that I didn't sleep, right? I still had to take the test. And what this tale kind of reminds us is we don't see the full picture in the moment, especially when we're catastrophizing and ruminating. Another concept in spirituality that relates to this story is this idea of surrendering and letting go. Traditionally, we want fruits of our outcomes. If we put in hard work, we expect to do well. And it's really challenging to understand the idea that I might put in all the work and still not get the result I want. I played sports in high school. I draw a lot of analogies to sports. The NBA team that loses in the finals, they put in just as much work as the team that wins. They wanted it just as bad, and they end up coming short. And does that mean their season is a failure? No. I think a lot of the guys that are at that high level have understood that they can only control the work they put in. They can't control if they end up winning the game. And I think that's something in medicine I need to work on, and a lot of my peers probably could work on a little bit too. In Hinduism, there's a specific line where Krishna, who's the Godhead, tells Arjuna, which is the person going through the dilemma in the Bhagavad Gita, you have the right to perform your duty, but not to the fruits of your actions. And this is the essence of something called karma yoga in Hinduism, which is to do your best, but then let go of the outcome. In my case, I studied for months. I did what I could. I didn't cheat the process. And I have to start to develop and understand that if I'm putting in that work, I need to just let everything else rest. And I think that's really challenging for somebody like me, but something I want to work on and a lesson I learned from this experience. Another thing in Buddhism, we touched on it with the Taoism, is this idea of non-attachment. I was attached to this idea of a perfect test day, perfect preparation, this idea in my head that I needed to sleep, I needed to do this, I needed to wake up at this time, I need to go to bed at this time to be successful. And that ended up being my downfall. And Buddhism teaches, and Hinduism too, teaches this idea of clinging, whether it's to bad things and being afraid of them, or clinging to good things and needing them and wanting them as being the cause of suffering. And if we're able to let go of that clinging, it can really help give us mental freedom, and in this case, mental peace before the test. The last thing I want to discuss is the illusion of control. In the Tao Te Ching, it says, "Do you have the patience to wait till your mud settles and the water is clear?" At its core, the illusion of control is the idea that we can control things that are ultimately out of our control and out of our hands. It stems from this deep desire to need predictability, to need perfection, to need security, which is true across all things, but especially for high stakes situations like step one. In my case, I did everything right before. I studied, I stuck to my study plan, I consulted with academic advisors, I did everything. But before, one aspect of the preparation didn't go well. I didn't sleep. And my mind was in a loop. Maybe if I splash water in my face, maybe if I take a shower, I'll be okay, I'll be able to sleep. I'll be able to fix this. And that is the illusion of control at work. The belief that one more tweak would make my preparation perfect. This illusion of control is seen as the source of suffering in Buddhism, or dukkha. When we let go of certain things needing to happen, peace arises. There's a Zen proverb, let go or be dragged. I was being dragged by the idea that I needed everything to go perfectly the way my head said it. And it was honestly only when I let go, when my mom kind of told me to just chill and lay, that some peace emerged. I was able to just lie there. And even though I didn't fall asleep, I think that mental switch helped when I went to the test. And ultimately, the illusion of control is not just about step one or about sleep. It's about life. I will face, and we will discuss on this podcast, many other situations where the illusion of control is completely ripped away from me. But I have to learn to do my best and just let go. And this experience is a rehearsal for other things moving forward in my life. Letting go isn't failure, it's trust.